I never thought I'd end up being the kind of person who weaponized a courtroom. When people imagine criminals, they picture masks, guns, bloodstains, maybe some guy in a dark alley exchanging cash under a flickering street lamp. Nobody imagines a pressed suit, polished shoes, and a stack of legal documents thick enough to choke a printer. But honestly, some of the dirtiest crimes happen under fluorescent lights with coffee breath and stamped signatures. This happened about 8 years ago. Back then I worked as a business consultant, which is a very generous way of saying I specialized in fixing problems for wealthy people who didn't want fingerprints on anything ugly. Debt collection, intimidation, corporate sabotage, not directly, of course. I was the middleman. The translator between rich men's anger and legal-looking paperwork. The victim, though I didn't call him that at the time, was a contractor named Daniel Mercer. Small construction company owner. Mid-40s. Divorced. 2 kids. The kind of guy who still believed if you worked hard enough and stayed honest, things balanced out in the end. People like Daniel are easy to destroy because they think the system protects them. The whole thing started with a property dispute. One of my clients, a real estate developer named Garrison, wanted Daniel off a commercial renovation project downtown. Daniel refused to back out because he'd already invested most of his company's cash flow into materials and labor. Legally, Garrison couldn't force him out quickly enough. So he decided to bury him instead. I remember the exact restaurant where Garrison pitched the idea to me. Steakhouse. Private booth. Jazz music low enough to sound expensive. He slid a folder across the table while cutting into a medium-rare ribeye like we were discussing golf memberships. "Can you pressure him?" he asked. "Not hurt him physically. Not threaten him directly. Pressure him. That word matters." Inside the folder were photocopies of contracts, internal emails, invoices, and a handwritten note listing Daniel's vulnerabilities. Asterisk owed taxes. Asterisk ongoing custody dispute. Asterisk thin operating margins. Asterisk personally guaranteed business loans. Translation: one good lawsuit could suffocate him. That's the thing most people don't understand. You don't need to win a lawsuit to ruin someone. You just need to make defending themselves expensive enough. At first, I told myself it wasn't really illegal. Aggressive? Sure. Unethical? Absolutely. But technically criminal? I danced around that question for weeks. Then Garrison wired me $40,000 up front. Funny how morality gets quieter after a transfer clears. The plan was simple on paper. We would fabricate claims that Daniel committed breach of contract, financial misconduct, and unauthorized project delays. Nothing cartoonish. The lies had to be close enough to reality to survive initial scrutiny. That's the trick with sham lawsuits. Pure fiction collapses immediately. The best lies are stitched carefully into truth like barbed wire hidden inside cloth. I hired a small law firm that specialized in high-pressure commercial litigation. They never asked too many questions as long as the retainer arrived on time. I still remember sitting in my apartment at 2 a.m. surrounded by highlighted documents, building a fake timeline of events. Rearranging emails. Cropping attachments. Drafting narratives. Every sentence had to sound sterile and professional. Not emotional. Emotion looks suspicious in legal writing. What scares me now is how thrilling it felt. I wasn't some street criminal panicking under pressure. I felt intelligent. Controlled. Superior. Like I'd discovered a loophole in human civilization itself, that if you dressed cruelty in formal language, people would call it procedure. The first official filing went out on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Daniel called the office. I answered personally because I wanted to hear his voice. He sounded confused more than angry. "There has to be some mistake," he kept saying. Mistake. God, I remember staring at the phone after the call ended, realizing that he genuinely believed truth alone could save him. That was the moment I crossed the line inside myself. Not when I filed false claims. Not when I took the money. When I heard fear in another man's voice, and kept going anyway, after Daniel's call, I understood something important. Panic doesn't hit people all at once. It arrives in layers. The first layer was confusion. The second was embarrassment. By the third, people started making mistakes. That's what I was counting on. Over the next 2 weeks, I built the lawsuit into something heavier than it actually was. Not stronger legally, just louder. We flooded Daniel's company with document requests, compliance notices, demands for financial disclosure. Every envelope carried the same hidden message: you are already losing. I even rented a temporary office downtown to make our operation look larger. Glass walls, reception desk, fake assistants answering phones. Optics matter more than truth in these situations. One night, my attorney, Keller, leaned back in his chair and laughed while reviewing the paperwork. "Guy like this won't survive 6 months," he said casually. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it shocked me, but because I realized we weren't trying to win anymore. The lawsuit itself was the punishment. And the worst part? I was becoming good at it. About a month into the lawsuit, Daniel finally stopped sounding confused. He sounded exhausted. I saw him for the first time outside the courthouse during a preliminary hearing. He looked nothing like the confident contractor from his company photos. His suit didn't fit properly, his beard was uneven, and there were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. He kept flipping through a binder of paperwork with shaking hands. Meanwhile, Keller walked in smiling, carrying coffee like we were attending a networking event. That imbalance was intentional. Inside the courtroom, we accused Daniel's company of project negligence and financial damages that didn't even exist. Keller spoke smoothly, confidently, citing altered timelines I had personally assembled at my kitchen table. Daniel interrupted twice, trying to defend himself directly. The judge shut him down both times. Procedure matters more than emotion in court. Outside afterward, Daniel approached me near the courthouse steps. His voice was low. "You know this isn't true." For half a second, guilt hit me hard enough to make my chest tighten. Then I lied straight to his face. "Talk to your attorney," I said, and walked away. Once the hearings began, the real damage happened outside the courtroom. That was always the strategy. A lawsuit doesn't destroy someone during dramatic legal speeches. It destroys them quietly at night when banks stop calling back, employees grow nervous, and every email feels like another threat. I knew exactly where to apply pressure because Garrison had given me Daniel's financial records early on. We leaked rumors to suppliers that Daniel's company might collapse before the project finished. Suddenly, vendors demanded upfront payments. Insurance companies requested additional reviews. One subcontractor backed out entirely after hearing concerns about pending litigation. None of it could be traced directly to me. That's the beauty of indirect attacks. Everyone else finishes the job for you. Still, things started getting messy. Daniel hired a new attorney named Rebecca Holt, and unlike the others, she actually read everything carefully. During one conference call, she questioned inconsistencies in our timeline so precisely that my stomach tightened. Keller brushed it off afterward, but I noticed something dangerous for the first time. Someone was looking too closely. Rebecca scared me immediately. Not because she was aggressive, but because she stayed calm. Most lawyers in these cases posture constantly. They raise their voices, threaten countersuits, perform confidence for clients. Rebecca barely reacted emotionally at all. She just listened, took notes, and asked questions that landed like needles under skin. During a deposition, she focused on a single invoice we had modified to support the breach of contract claim. Tiny detail. Wrong date format. Most people would never notice. But she noticed. "Why does this document use a different accounting template than the others from that quarter?" she asked. The room went silent for a second too long. Keller answered smoothly, blaming administrative formatting changes, but I could feel sweat collecting under my collar. Rebecca didn't argue. She simply nodded like she'd placed a piece onto a puzzle board. That night I couldn't sleep. For the first time, I stopped thinking about money and started thinking about prison. I sat alone in my apartment reviewing every forged email and altered attachment, realizing how fragile the whole scheme actually was. One mistake. One overlooked detail. That's all it takes. Fear makes people reckless. Unfortunately, that included me. Instead of backing away after Rebecca questioned the invoice, I doubled down. I convinced myself the only way out was forward, overwhelm Daniel before his attorney could pull the thread apart. So we expanded the lawsuit and filed additional claims for reputational damages and intentional project interference. Completely fabricated. The new filings triggered another wave of financial pressure on Daniel's business. One of his lenders froze a credit extension almost immediately. Payroll delays started hitting his employees. A local trade publication even mentioned the case publicly, which made everything worse. Then Daniel did something I didn't expect. He called me directly late one night. Not yelling. Not threatening. Begging. He said he'd settle, walk away from the contract, anything. He just needed the attacks to stop because his company was collapsing. I remember hearing his kids in the background arguing over something ordinary, probably homework. That sound bothered me more than his pleading did. For a moment, I almost ended it. Then Garrison increased my payment offer by another $50,000. Everything started unraveling because of one careless email. Not mine, surprisingly. Keller's. He accidentally forwarded an internal strategy message to Rebecca's office instead of another partner. Nothing openly criminal, but the wording was ugly enough to raise questions. Phrases like, apply maximum financial pressure, and force surrender before trial, don't sound great when you're pretending a lawsuit is about justice. Keller called me in a panic the second he realized the mistake. I drove to his office around midnight, and for the first time since this started, he looked genuinely afraid. His expensive confidence was gone. Shirt untucked. Whiskey on the desk. Sweating through his collar. We contain it, he kept repeating. Contain it. Like we were discussing a chemical spill instead of a man's life. The next morning, Rebecca filed motions demanding additional discovery records, internal communications, and financial documentation. Suddenly the walls felt closer. Every altered file on my laptop became evidence in my imagination. Then Garrison vanished for 3 straight days. Wouldn't answer calls. Wouldn't answer texts. That's when I realized something every fixer eventually learns. The rich disappear first when things go bad. I spent the next week trying to erase myself from the situation. Every conversation felt dangerous. Every notification on my phone made my pulse jump. I started waking up at 4 in the morning convinced federal agents were outside my apartment door. Funny thing is, nobody was even investigating us yet. Fear creates its own reality long before consequences arrive. I deleted emails, wiped external drives, shredded printed drafts in a rented industrial bin across town. Looking back, those actions probably made me look guiltier than the original fraud. Rebecca kept pushing harder. She requested metadata from several submitted documents, including the altered invoice she questioned earlier. That terrified me because metadata tells stories people forget about. Edit histories, timestamps, usernames. Digital fingerprints. Keller insisted his IT contact could clean things up, but by then I trusted nobody. Then Daniel appeared outside my office unexpectedly. He looked thinner than before. Exhausted. Angry. You took everything from me, he said quietly. I wanted to deny it. Instead, I stood there in silence because deep down, I knew he was right. A few days after Daniel confronted me, Garrison finally resurfaced. He invited me to a private club outside the city, the kind of place with marble floors, silent staff, and men who ruin lives while discussing wine. I arrived angry, expecting explanations. Instead, Garrison treated the entire situation like a minor inconvenience. You're getting emotional, he told me. That sentence nearly pushed me over the edge. Easy for him to say. His name wasn't attached to the filings directly. Mine was buried everywhere: communications, invoices, coordination records. If things collapsed, I'd be the one standing in front of investigators while he disappeared behind expensive attorneys. I told him Rebecca was getting close. He barely reacted. Then discredit her, he said calmly. Just like that. No hesitation. No morality. Another human being reduced to an obstacle. On the drive home, I realized something ugly about myself. Part of me admired him. Garrison never doubted himself. Never lost sleep. Men like him survive because they outsource guilt to people like me. And I had accepted the job willingly. Discrediting Rebecca should have been the moment I walked away. Instead, I crossed another line. I hired a private investigator I'd worked with years earlier, a former cop named Travis who specialized in background pressure. Officially, he gathered public information. Unofficially, he dug for vulnerabilities people preferred hidden. Within days, he produced a file on Rebecca: divorce records, financial stress, an old complaint from a former client that went nowhere. Nothing criminal. Nothing useful legally. But enough to smear her reputation online. That was the plan. Anonymous posts appeared on legal forums questioning her ethics and competence. Fake accounts hinted she mishandled client funds. None of the claims were provable, but they didn't need to be. Suspicion spreads faster than truth. The terrifying part was how normal this behavior had become to me. I remember sitting at my kitchen counter eating takeout while coordinating character assassination like it was office work. Then Rebecca called me directly. Not angry. Disappointed. She said, "Whatever this started as, you still have time to stop." That sentence stayed in my head for days afterward. Daniel's company folded 3 weeks later. Officially, it was due to financial instability during ongoing litigation. In reality, we strangled it slowly until nothing remained. Employees lost jobs. Projects stopped. Creditors circled like vultures. And despite everything, the lawsuit itself still hadn't reached trial. That's the part people don't understand about weaponized litigation. The process is the destruction. I heard the news while sitting in Keller's office reviewing revised filings. He smiled when he read the update. "Well," he said, "that solves the contract issue." I felt sick immediately. Not dramatic movie guilt. Something colder. Heavier. Like realizing you've been walking downhill for so long that climbing back up may no longer be possible. That night I drove past Daniel's closed office building. The company's sign had already been removed. Empty windows. Dark lobby. Years of someone's life erased quietly behind glass doors. I stayed parked across the street for almost an hour. Then I saw Daniel exit the building carrying a cardboard box. That image broke something inside me more than any courtroom threat ever did. 2 mornings later, federal investigators contacted Keller's firm. Not because of Daniel. Because of taxes. That's what makes life terrifying sometimes. You obsess over one danger while another walks through the front door unnoticed. Apparently, investigators reviewing Daniel's financial collapse discovered irregularities tied to consulting payments connected to Garrison's development company. Once subpoenas started moving, our lawsuit attracted attention too. Suddenly everyone panicked. Keller stopped returning calls consistently. Travis disappeared entirely. Garrison hired a crisis management attorney and communicated only through intermediaries. The circle tightened fast, and loyalty vanished even faster. Then Rebecca subpoenaed metadata records from the court submissions before anyone could fully scrub them. That was the real disaster. The altered invoice traced back to a draft created on my personal laptop. I remember staring at the notice in disbelief, rereading the same paragraph over and over while my hands shook uncontrollably. Months of manipulation destroyed by invisible digital timestamps I barely understood. For the first time, I seriously considered running. But where do you run when the evidence is already waiting for you? The investigators interviewed me in a gray federal office that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. No intimidation tactics. No screaming. That almost made it worse. They already knew enough. One agent slid printed email chains across the table while another calmly explained potential charges: fraud, conspiracy, evidence tampering, obstruction. Hearing those words out loud made everything suddenly real. Until then, part of me still treated the whole situation like a complicated business conflict. It wasn't. It was a crime. They focused heavily on Garrison, which told me immediately what was happening. I wasn't the final target anymore. I was leverage. For 3 sleepless nights, I wrestled with the decision. Stay loyal and probably go to prison for years, or cooperate and become the man who betrayed everyone involved. In the end, survival won. I signed a cooperation agreement and handed investigators everything: emails, payment records, burner phone numbers, internal drafts. Every hidden corner of the operation exposed piece by piece. When Garrison learned I'd cooperated, he left me one voicemail. "You were always weaker than I thought." Maybe he was right. Garrison was indicted 6 months later. Keller lost his license not long after that, though he avoided prison through a separate settlement. Travis vanished completely. Last I heard, he moved overseas. Everybody scattered once the spotlight turned on. Funny how fast powerful networks dissolve when consequences become personal. As for me, I received a reduced sentence because of my cooperation agreement. 18 months in federal prison, followed by supervised release. Compared to what could have happened, I got lucky. Daniel didn't. His business never recovered. His marriage collapsed under the financial stress, and from what I later heard, he spent years drowning in debt created by a lawsuit built almost entirely on lies. That knowledge stayed with me every single day inside prison. People imagine incarceration as nonstop violence or fear. Honestly, the hardest part was silence. Too much time alone with memory. Too much replaying conversations I wished I could undo. Especially one moment. Daniel standing outside my office saying, "You took everything from me." Back then, I treated it like exaggeration. Now I understand it was probably the most honest sentence anyone said to me during the entire ordeal. I've spent years trying to understand when exactly I became the villain in this story. Was it when I accepted Garrison's money? When I forged documents? When I listened to Daniel beg and continued anyway? Truthfully, corruption doesn't arrive in one dramatic moment. It happens gradually, through small compromises you justify because they seem temporary or necessary. You convince yourself you're just playing a role, just following procedure, just surviving. Then one day you look back and realize you destroyed someone's life for profit. That realization changes you permanently. People online love talking about crime like it's exciting: strategy, deception, beating the system. And yes, there's adrenaline. There's ego. For a while, power feels intoxicating. But what nobody tells you is that guilt becomes its own prison long before any courtroom sentence arrives. I still think about Daniel sometimes. I doubt he'd care about apologies now, and honestly, he probably shouldn't. So if anyone reading this is tempted to use the legal system as a weapon, remember this. Paper can ruin lives just as effectively as bullets. Sometimes even more quietly.